DC has a lot riding on the new Superman movie. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Today we've got something just a little different for you guys, something we don't normally do, and that's reacting to the new Superman trailer that released earlier this week. So today we're just going to give you a little bit of our thoughts, what we like, what we don't like, and what we hope to come from the movie that's releasing next year, and what it might mean for DC and the new slate of movies coming from James Gunn and co. Daniel.
So my overall take on Superman movies in general is that there has not really been a really good one, right? The one in the 70s had a great Superman, but a not great plot. The Snyderverse just had the wrong take on Superman in general and on superheroes in general, I thought. And if you go down the list, like every version of Superman has had some major problems as far as I'm concerned. And so one of the things I'm hoping that this movie will bring is that it'll just do the iconic or the definitive version of Superman and just gets the basics right on all fronts. So on the Superman front, on the story front, on the villain front, on the effects front, everything. And I was kind of approaching the trailer through that lens. And I've got some mixed thoughts on that. So my very first reaction when I saw it was, I hate how this looks. Like I just the color palette, and I don't know what exactly it is that kind of triggers my fight or flight reflex. It might be the saturation, it might be the brightness, I don't know. But like it just looks kind of a little bit off. And I think that's because they're trying to make it look comic booky and whatever that means. But I think they haven't got the balance quite right in this. And I hope that can be corrected still in the 6 months or so that we have until this movie's release. But that was just my initial reaction. But the more I watched and rewatched the trailer, the more optimistic I actually felt. Because it looks a lot like they have a take on Superman that is not simply let's do the opposite of Snyder, right? That's one thing they could do. Where the Snyderverse was more cynical, this one is more optimistic, and where that one was dark, this one is bright, and so on. It doesn't really seem to be that. It seems to lead in a brighter direction. But when you look at the different scenes that are in there, it starts off with Superman being defeated, right? And throughout the trailer, he's being hated by the public and he's crushed by the weight of presumably the responsibility that comes with being Superman. So this is not just Superman like rescuing kittens from trees for 2 hours, right? Like this seems to be very much like a somewhat grounded story that deals with the psychology of being Superman and with a world that doesn't quite embrace him. So on that front, I think it's going in a direction that's making me cautiously optimistic.
Do you know, funny enough, I actually agree with your first point about the kind of color grading on this, because when I first saw it and when I first saw the teaser trailer that they released, I did have this similar reaction of this looks quite different to kind of what you're used to, and I couldn't quite put my finger on sort of why. It just kind of like jarred me a little bit, but it just kind of like took me by surprise. And in the first reaction, I was like, okay, this is a little bit off. But like you said, in terms of the content of the trailer, I think there was a lot that worked for me. So I'm one of those people that isn't really the biggest Superman guy. I haven't ever particularly found him that interesting. I did enjoy the Man of Steel movie, actually, the Zack Snyder version of it. I like kind of like how dark and how gritty that was, even though, I know that that's not the Superman that people were sort of hoping for. But in terms of sort of this trailer and kind of the first opening shot of seeing him sort of beaten up, bruised, bloodied, etc., and sort of kind of like showing him to be a little bit more vulnerable was really good. I kind of like, again, like you mentioned about sort of the kind of like the weight of being Superman and sort of the complexities of it, because you have scenes in this where he's like saving the little girl and sort of but then you also have kind of like the destruction of when you're fighting superpowered beings. And I know that was a criticism that people had for the Zack Snyder version of Superman, but it's almost like James Gunn is kind of like reinforcing the point of like these things happened, and I think in the movie, you're going to kind of maybe potentially see that these things do happen, but it's like, what is like, Superman's kind of like reaction to that? What is this kind of like, this kind of like psyche behind it, the way that people react and the way that he potentially changes people's perception of him, because again, he is this super powered being. He is this kind of like alien. And even though in this like in this movie, it's established that there are a lot of like other superpowered beings and this and the other, that feels like he's going to have to sort of win over public perception of him despite some of the sort of casualties and some of the sort of damage that might be causing him trying to sort of do the right thing. So in that sense, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing the complexities and sort of the kind of like emotion behind that. I do hope so. I've never really been too big on the Superman and Lois kind of relationship as well, the dynamic. I think that was a part that I didn't quite enjoy as well in the Zack Snyder version of the movie as well. And it seems like it's going to be a big part of this movie. So I'm really hoping that it doesn't come off as cheesy or like campy or whatever. Because like I never really bought into in the Man of Steel. I never really bought into that relationship between sort of Superman and Lois. So I think already as well. I do like the way that Lois kind of looks and kind of like walks about, and like the little bit of swagger that she had sort of in the shots that she had in this, especially some of the scenes in the Daily Planet. So I did like that, but I'm just hoping that they're able to kind of like nail that sort of side of things as well in the movie.
And there's a fair amount of emotion in this trailer, right? Like there are multiple scenes between Superman and Lois, right? There's the scene where he's with Park Kent, where they are kind of sitting on the porch of the farm and having some kind of emotional moment, which seemed to me like a very deliberate throwback to Man of Steel, right? Because there's this infamous scene in Man of Steel where Park Kent tells Superman that being a hero is for idiots and he shouldn't be one, which I think is one of those watershed moments where the movie lost a lot of people. And they seem to be calling back to that as well. And it remains to be seen what context that scene happens in this movie. And then there's also a scene where Superman grieves for a robot. That I think is a very deliberate choice, that Superman is so good he even is sad for, I'm actually not sure, like that is our character from the comics, some kind of caretaker of the Fortress of Solitude, I think.
Yeah.
So not just a robot, right? But like Superman is so human and so empathetic that he grieves for somebody who isn't human, right? And I think that is what that shot kind of signifies, right? So there's a lot of emotion in this, and there's also a lot of children in this, right? There's the little girl that Superman saves, which you need to have a shot of him saving somebody. And that shows that this movie remembers that it's not just about punching the bad guy, it's about saving the innocents, right? And then there's also this boy that calls for help from Superman, right? And I think there seems to be a really big contrast between what the adults think of Superman and what the children think of Superman. And maybe it is something about how, like James Gunn has said, this is a Superman that is kind in a world that thinks kindness is old-fashioned. And the angle here might be he's misunderstood, or he's being held responsible for fallout or collateral damage to his actions as he was trying to help. And the children, primarily because they're not caught up in the politics of it and so on, they just can see his goodness for what it is. That seems to be kind of the gist, which is an interesting take. I think this trailer goes out of its way, I think, to show the human side and the emotional side of Superman as well. And like you mentioned, his power is something that kind of stands in the way of good stories a lot of the time, because it can't just be about, is Superman strong enough to defeat the bad guy, right? Number one, he always is, right? Because he's the hero. But also, it's difficult to physically challenge Superman, right? Like there are ways to do it, but if that's what your story hinges on, that's probably a bad start. And here it seems to be more about the consequences of him using his strength as opposed to, is he strong enough? So I don't think we're in for 2 hours of him fighting CGI monsters, but rather more about how to use his powers and the ramifications of him having used his powers. And I think that is like the trailer is very light on plot. It doesn't show very much. There's some glimpses that you can infer here or there, but the emphasis seems to be very much on everything that surrounds his powers as opposed to, here's somebody for Superman to fight.
It's going to be interesting as well, because again, in this universe that James Gunn is building, is that all these other heroes are already established. So you got, things like the Green Lantern in there, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, and stuff like that in the movie already. So it's going to be interesting how he positions Superman against a lot of these sort of supporting sort of heroes that are going to be in this movie as well. And again, there isn't too much to go off of, so you really can't sort of kind of like judge how the other superheroes are going to be in this, in terms of sort of how cynical they might be, and like you mentioned a lot about sort of protecting kind of like the innocence, and sort of like when some of the older adults have these like politicized views and stuff like that, and how that maybe sort of kind of like changes their perception of Superman. And it could be a case of maybe not to the extreme of sort of the boys or whatever, but how things like that could potentially like radicalize other superheroes that he's sort of like interacting, but then he kind of has to try to like maintain his innocence and maintain sort of the purity and sort of like the kind of like the empathy and stuff like that you mentioned. Not too much to go off of in the trailer in terms of sort of that aspect of it, but it would just be like I in this movie I'm hoping to see how Superman differs in sort of his position to sort of carrying out his job compared to sort of all the other heroes that he's interacting with.
I think there's one clue in the trailer, and that is when Superman enters the building and people are essentially throwing rotten fruit at him and cabbages and everything, right? The mob has turned on Superman in that scene, right? And the police is kind of protecting him, as in they're keeping the mob away, and he's kind of in this building, and he's then has some kind of moment of kind of despair, or he's collecting his strength or something. Like, it's unclear what he's exactly doing, but Green Lantern then kind of seals the building with like a force field, and he has got this annoyed look on his face. And it looks like from the shot in this trailer that at least Green Lantern is on his side, right? Where the mob has turned against the heroes, either the heroes in general or against Superman in particular. And at least some of the heroes are on Superman's side, and they realize like what position he's in and what he's done or hasn't done or whatever the case may be. But there seems to be a kind of distance between the heroes and the general public. The public seems to be angry, but the people in the know are on Superman's side. That's what seems to be happening, right? And we'll see if that's how it plays out, but that's kind of how that shot came across to me. One thing that's very prominent in this trailer is Lex Luthor, right? So my take on this is every Superman movie so far has been centered on Lex as the villain, right? And I don't think any of the versions have been very good or interesting. Like the versions of Lex Luthor I like is like from the animated series from the 90s, early 2000s. And there's a couple of comics that apparently are an inspiration for this version. But I like the ruthless businessman, tech genius that basically thinks the hero of humanity should be a human and the alien cannot be trusted. Like, that's kind of the angle of Lex Luthor that I find interesting. And so when the casting news came out and it was revealed that Lex Luthor was cast in this, I actually kind of hoped that he wouldn't be the villain, that he existed in this world and maybe was being set up as the villain for a future one. But from this trailer, it actually looks like he's probably the big antagonist, right? So there's a lot of emphasis of him being angry, presumably at Superman in his office. There's a scene where Superman is fighting goons and they're wearing the Lex colors, the green and the purple. It's unclear whether those are Luthor's henchmen or whether those are government agents or military equipped with Luthor tech. There's a bunch of different scenarios that it could be, but Luthor is involved in fighting Superman, right? And looks like Superman is being imprisoned as well, and he's being charged with something, and presumably Luthor is behind that. And like, this trailer has actually sold me on the idea that this might be a good idea, because previously I said just do Brainiac, do anybody other than Luthor, because we've done Luthor like 5 times and it's never been all that great. And kind of this look and vibe that I'm getting from Luthor actually makes me kind of optimistic that there might be something here. And I think the reason for it is that the emotion that's in this kind of makes me feel like Luthor actually has like a thesis on Superman and why he opposes Superman and what is justified, or what he is justified in doing because of that. Like, I'm kind of getting that vibe, right? Like, we'll have to see from the actual trailer that reveals more about the story. But this one kind of salvaged my expectations for Luthor a little bit, where I'm okay with him being the villain or a major villain, if that's the approach that they're taking.
Yeah, I'm not as versed in terms of like Lex Luthor, etc. Obviously, the one that I know the most is the Jesse Eisenberg one from Batman Superman, and controversially, he was quite the sort of kind of like different, more erratic and kind of more eccentric sort of version of Lex Luthor in that movie. From everything that I've seen and from knowing how James Gunn operates, I have like the utmost faith that he's going to do sort of the most faithful adaptation of Lex Luthor, as well as the most sort of faithful adaptations of sort of many of these characters that we're going to get in this movie. Obviously, Superman being sort of the other main one in this, just because of referencing all the different sort of comic books that are inspiring this movie and sort of kind of like posting sort of stills of them and things like that. And it just shows a great appreciation for the source material and sort of kind of like where things have come from. And, we've had many discussions about adaptations and sort of what are good adaptations, what are bad adaptations, etc. And I feel like, again, James Gunn is the right person to pull the necessary kind of like characteristics from sort of multiple comics to build the perfect Lex Luthor. And I'm kind of hoping that, knowing that he's one of the main antagonists for Superman and kind of like one of the big villains, I'm kind of hoping that he does stick around, because like that is also like another. It's more of a Marvel problem where they have kind of like superhero of the week, where you fight one superhero and then that's it, they're defeated. You never see them again, and we've kind of lost a lot of good superheroes to that. The one that I'm thinking of at the moment is called the God Butcher. I think he was criminally underused for having such a talented actor. And for the portrayal that he was putting up in that movie, given the limited work. So it'd be good to have some of these villains in this universe actually, maybe coming back, even if Lex Luthor ends up getting arrested or something like that. Maybe he still has like a role to play in like, future movies further down the line, or like he makes a return at some point. So yeah, still another thing to kind of like wait and see how it plays out.
It would certainly be interesting if this was a Luthor that stuck around for a few movies and kind of developed a history with this Superman. And maybe he's not directly defeated in this, but just his immediate plan gets foiled or something. Like there's options, but yeah, it doesn't look like a throwaway villain. It looks like they have an idea for what this character's deal is. And I think that's a good start. Yeah, just in general, I think Gunn still has to deliver, right? Like this is a massive project, and he's not usually in charge, right? Usually he's in charge of the creative side, and now he's in charge of the entire thing. And so this is new territory, and there are massive stakes for the company, right? That ultimately is his top priority. But he does have a track record of making you care about characters that you've never heard of, right? So I think that if there's anything that he can contribute, it's a movie where there's a lot of these characters where by the end of the movie you care about them, right? You know what their deal is, and you know what their journey is, and you care about them.
What's funny is Crypto the dog is probably going to be the one that gets the most like emotionally in this. You just know he's going to get like the best story out of this movie.
It's possible, yeah. And like that's new ground for movies, right? None of the movies have ever gotten near Crypto. And this is something that could very easily not work on a big screen. But yeah, the first impression I've gotten from that trailer is a positive one. And I think there's a reason for him to be in the movie. He's not just a gimmick, right? Like Star Wars has this thing where they always have the cute droid to the point where it's like predictable. And you kind of every time you watch one of them, you know that's going to be there. And so at some point it feels obligatory. And like a character like Crypto can be like that. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. There seems to be like an actual function in the story. And in general, like this is something that I think the superhero genre has lacked in recent years. And I think I don't think superhero fatigue is really happening. But to the extent that it is, it's because in the last couple of years, the genre in general has neglected character. There are CGI fest, there's a big sky laser at the end. The fights are just actors doing this. And then there's energy blasts put in post-production, and it's kind of the story. And like one of the reasons why the MCU has struggled in recent years is because none of their lineup actually has a story that's worth following. And I think this movie is a very deliberate and conscious attempt to change that, to seed, first of all, to tell a story about Superman, and then to seed a bunch of other characters who then go on to have their own stories. And that, I think, is the exact right approach. And I don't really care about like just how bright his costume is or the exact design of his underwear, right? Like a lot of people are focusing on. I think what this movie really needs to get right, beyond anything else, is we need to care about these characters, and those characters need to have stories that are worth watching and worth going on a journey with these characters with. And if that movie can do that, then we are in for some good movies in the coming decade. And I think that's the current problem with the MCU, and that's been a problem for most of the DCU in the past decade, where there are characters that are there because they're part of the IP, but they don't actually have a really good story to follow. And if anybody understands that, it's probably Gunn. And at least I hope so. Like it's a done deal now, right? The movie is made, and I hope that's what they lean into, and that's what they're doing. Because if they aren't, then this entire thing, I think, is doomed from the start.
I mean, his last outing was Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't know if you actually watched that, because I know you you did watch that, and that one really heavy on the character, heavy on the emotion, heavy sort of kind of like getting you invested in people's stories in that movie. So, and
the Suicide Squad is one of my favorite DC movies from the past decade. Like there's a handful that I think are watchable, and the Suicide Squad is at the top of that. of that list.
I wouldn't even just like put it as just watchable. I think that's a very, very good superhero movie. Like I was like genuinely surprised at how good that turned out to be.
Yeah, I meant as in worth watching.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Like a lot of them are just not even worth looking at. And the Suicide Squad, along with Guardians, knows how to make you care about characters. Right. And that is why I was optimistic when the news came that James Gunn was put in charge of this. And that is why I'm optimistic after seeing this trailer, because that's the lesson that seems to have been learned from the past decade. And if that's their analysis of why the genre has been struggling in recent years, and that's what they're trying to fix, then I think it's on the right path, and that's the vibe I'm getting from this trailer.
Okay. Cool. It sounds like we're both super excited, very positive. And very optimistic as to kind of like what's to come.
Cautiously optimistic. Like we owe nothing to DC, right? They need to earn our goodwill and they need to earn our money, right? By giving us something that's worth engaging with and worth buying a ticket for. And if they don't, then I'm gonna shrug and move on to the next thing, right? I'm not gonna get invested again in something in the hopes that it gets good again. Like that bridge has been burned several times over over the past 10, 15 years, not just in the DCU, but in everything else too. They're getting a fresh start. They're getting a new chance. And if they deliver, then I'd happily sing their praises.
I think best case scenario for me is James Gunn does to Superman what the Russo brothers did to Captain America for me, because I wasn't super big on Captain America. Again, they're kind of like similar in terms of like their ideals, very optimistic, very sort of like empathetic, etc. So I wasn't at first initially big on Captain America, but then he quickly became sort of kind of one of my favorite ones, one of the ones that you respected the most in the Avengers. So kind of hoping that I have the same appreciation for Superman by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I've been saying for years that Captain America First Avenger is the best Superman movie ever made. Let's see if I have to revise that in 6 months.
Yeah, we'll see. I think that's everything. Guys, thank you for working with us. Thank you for kind of jumping into our discussion. Again, slightly different to what we typically do around here. We normally sort of do full movie discussions. But let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are you hoping for? What are you expecting in the next Superman movie? And yeah, are you excited? Just let us know in the comment. And of course, if you enjoyed this discussion, tell a friend. If you hated it, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye.
Ciao.